The doctor walked out of the intensive care unit, his face unreadable. Tracy's parents, her siblings, and the few friends who had stood by her through everything rose to their feet, their hearts pounding. "I'm sorry," the doctor said, voice heavy with regret. "She didn't make it." The room fell silent. The weight of those words sank deep, like stones thrown into a river, rippling through everyone who loved her. But Dan? He was nowhere to be found. The father of her children. The man she had sacrificed everything for. The man she had sworn she could change. He was out at a club, arms wrapped around another woman, laughing, drinking, celebrating a life he had never valued. Before we go deeper into this unforgettable story, please hit that subscribe button. This is a tale of love, betrayal, and painful lessons, one that every person needs to hear. Dan and Tracy met in their first year at university. He was studying engineering but had a passion for soccer. Tracy, studying mass communication, had dreams of becoming a top journalist. They were young, ambitious, and deeply in love. Or at least Tracy was. Dan was charming, charismatic, and had a way with words. He made Tracy feel like the most important person in the world. But even in those early days, there were signs, little things, texts from other girls, rumors, unexplained disappearances. But every time Tracy confronted him, he would hold her hands, look her in the eyes, and say, "Baby, I love you. I'll change. Just give me time." And she always did. Dan's talent in soccer could not be ignored. He started playing for a local team, and soon scouts took notice. His passion and hard work eventually earned him a spot on an international team. His rise to fame was swift. Money, fame, and women followed. Tracy, on the other hand, was making a name for herself in broadcasting. She landed a job at a major TV station and quickly became one of the most well-known newscasters in the country. She was intelligent, eloquent, and respected. But despite her success, her heart remained tethered to Dan. By the time Dan became a household name, 3 different women were pregnant for him. Tracy found out from the media, just like everyone else. Humiliated, she confronted him. "How could you do this to me?" Tracy's voice cracked. She held up her phone, the headlines screaming at her. "Dan expecting third child from mystery woman." "Baby, it's not what you think," Dan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I messed up, but I love you. You're the only one I want to be with." Tears streamed down Tracy's face. "Then why do you keep hurting me?" "I'll change," he whispered. "I just need you to believe in me." And she did. Again. Tracy's friends saw it. Her family saw it. Even strangers could see it. Dan was not the kind of man who would ever change. His actions spoke louder than his words, but Tracy refused to listen. "Baby girl, this man will never stop cheating on you," her best friend, Manda, told her one evening after yet another scandal surfaced about Dan. "You're successful, beautiful, and smart. Why are you doing this to yourself?" Her mother was even more direct. "A grown man does not change unless he wants to, and Dan does not want to." But Tracy was stubborn. She clung to the belief that love could heal anything. "You don't know him like I do," she always said. "I can't fix him. I strongly believe he will change." Her friends shook their heads. Her family begged her to move on. But Tracy only saw the man she had fallen in love with, the charming, funny, ambitious Dan from their university days. She convinced herself that the scandals, the betrayals, and the lies were just obstacles they had to overcome. So when Dan proposed, she ignored every warning, every tearful plea from those who loved her. She saw the ring, the flash of cameras, the extravagant proposal, and all her doubts melted away. This is proof he loves me, she told herself. She married him, believing love would conquer anything. If Tracy thought that marriage would change Dan, she was wrong. If anything, things got worse. The affairs continued. Some women were bold enough to call their home. Others posted cryptic messages on social media. Tracy would see her husband's name trending, only to open her phone and find out that yet another woman was pregnant for him. But it wasn't just the cheating. Dan had become cruel in ways she never imagined. He mocked her, called her names, belittled her in front of others. "You should be grateful you're my wife," he would sneer after a long night out, reeking of alcohol and a perfume that wasn't hers. Then, one day, his cruelty turned physical. They had been arguing. Tracy accused him of disrespecting their marriage, and Dan, tired of hearing her complain, snapped. His hand struck her across the face before he even realized what he had done. Silence. Tracy stood frozen, her cheeks stinging, her eyes wide with disbelief. Dan looked just as shocked. Then, as quickly as it happened, he dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered, his voice thick with fake remorse. "It was the pressure. It won't happen again." And Tracy, like she always did, forgave him. But it did happen again and again, until the night it all came crashing down. That night, the argument between Dan and Tracy was louder than usual. It had started over something small, one of his late nights out, but quickly spiraled into a shouting match filled with years of pain and broken promises. Tracy, exhausted and heartbroken, yelled back, "I gave up everything for you, Dan, my family, my peace, and for what?" Her voice cracked, her body trembling with frustration and grief. Dan, already holding a drink, slammed it on the table, causing it to spill. He was furious, his face twisted with anger. "You knew what you were getting into, Tracy. You chose this life," he spat, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing heavy. Then it happened. Tracy took a step back, but her foot landed in the spilled drink. The floor was already smooth, and in that moment she lost her balance. Her arms flailed as she struggled to steady herself. But it was too late. She slipped, falling backward, her head hitting the sharp edge of a flower vase with a sickening crack. Everything went silent. Dan stood frozen, his eyes wide as he watched her body collapse to the floor. Blood began to pool around her head, staining the cold tiles. Her chest rose and fell, but her eyes remained closed. She had slipped into a coma. Most husbands would have been by their wife's bedside, praying, crying, begging for her to wake up. Dan? He was at a club that very night. He danced, laughed, drank. Photographers captured him in VIP sections, whispering into the ears of women Tracy had once accused him of cheating with. While she lay in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, he lived as though she was already dead. When Tracy's family confronted him, their faces pale with grief, he barely looked at them. "She'll be fine," he muttered, before dismissing them completely. But she wasn't fine. And Dan? He was already planning his next move. He went to his lawyer and said, "I need to file for a divorce." The lawyer hesitated. "Sir, in Nigeria, divorce is governed by the Matrimonial Causes Act. The law requires that both parties must be informed of the proceedings. The court must be satisfied that reconciliation is impossible and that the marriage has irretrievably broken down. She's still in a coma. Legally, she has to be informed. Please, you have to wait until she recovers." Dan was irritated. But he had no choice. He would wait, but not for long. Weeks passed. One morning, the doctor checked Tracy's vitals. The machines beeped in warning. Her breathing slowed. Then it stopped. Tracy was gone. Her family was shattered. They wanted justice. They wanted Dan to pay. They sued him for her death, arguing that his abuse had led to this moment. But the court reviewed the evidence, the CCTV footage from that night, and ruled it was an accident. She had slipped. She had fallen. Dan never touched her. And just like that, he walked free. Tracy's family mourned, not just for the daughter they had lost, but for the daughter who never listened. They had warned her. They had begged her to leave him. If only she had walked away when she had the chance. Maybe, just maybe, she would still be alive. And then, just months after her funeral, Dan married another woman, one of the very women he had flaunted while Tracy was in a coma. Moral of the story: Tracy believed she could change a man who never intended to change. She ignored every warning, believing love could fix what was fundamentally broken. In the end, she lost everything, including her life. Never stay in a toxic or abusive relationship. It is impossible to change an adult who does not want to change. Leave while you still can. Because when something happens to you, they will move on without a second thought. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real life lessons and gripping tales. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. The end.